Can a murder have a statute of limitations? Can time simply erase what was done to a child? More than 30 years ago, a monstrous crime took place in Yekaterinburg, Russia. The victim was an 8-year-old boy named Seryozha. His case shocked not just the city, it shook the entire country. But what disturbed people most wasn't only the crime itself. It was the fact that the killer managed to escape punishment entirely. For 3 decades, this case sat in silence. Then, last year, investigators made an announcement that stunned everyone who remembered. A suspect had been arrested. The morning of April 20th, 1995, 7-year-old Seryozha leaves for school. Back then, children were far more independent. Even first graders walked to school and back on their own without a second thought. Seryozha grew up in an ordinary working-class family on the outskirts of Uralmash, one of Yekaterinburg's roughest neighborhoods, on Vostania Street. He had an older sister. His school was just a 5-minute walk from home. 5 minutes. And yet that short distance was enough for the boy to vanish without a trace. When Seryozha didn't come home from school, his parents started searching, visiting friends, knocking on neighbors' doors, walking through every courtyard in the area. Nothing. No boy. Not even his backpack. A few hours later, his parents ran to the police. The report was filed. But the search didn't begin until the following morning. Precious hours. The hours that matter most when a child is missing, slipped away. The next day, the family opened their mailbox and found a note. It was written in what appeared to be a child's handwriting. It was a ransom demand. The amount was staggering, not just by the standards of mid-90s Russia, but even by today's. $50,000. The note read, in part, "Dear Vova, you live well and I live badly now. You are happy and I am sad. You betrayed me. For everything you've done to me, I will settle the score. Don't worry, your son is with me. If you want to see him alive and healthy, you must not tell anyone, not the police, not the neighbors. If you tell anyone, you will not see him alive. If you want your son to live, you must do what I write to you. On April 29th, place $50,000 in the mailbox where your letters are. I will check." The family didn't have that kind of money. They went to the police and handed over the note, and they immediately pointed investigators toward 2 young men from the next building entrance over. Boris Subotin and Andrei Ogloblin were well known in the neighborhood, and not for good reasons. They drank heavily, barely worked, and lived on the margins. 20-year-old Boris had dated Seryozha's older sister, 19-year-old Olga, for a period of time. He had been a regular presence in the Ovchinnikov household. Seryozha knew him, trusted him, but Olga's parents had never approved of Boris. He was aggressive, he drank, and he couldn't hold down a job. The tension reached a breaking point when Boris took Olga's father Vladimir's car without asking and totaled it. There was a massive confrontation. A large sum of money was demanded for repairs. Boris couldn't pay. He wasn't working. He was cut off, and he carried that grudge with him. After the boy's disappearance, both men were detained. Investigators expected a difficult interrogation. Instead, both confessed almost immediately. Ogloblin signed 3 separate written confessions. Subotin signed 2. At the time of their arrest, the family still held on to hope that Seryozha was alive. The ransom drop was scheduled for a specific day and time. Instead of cash, the family placed a decoy in the mailbox while police waited in ambush. Nobody came to collect it. Seryozha's mother later said that in that moment, she believed she had correctly identified the men who had taken her son, and that she was about to find out where they were hiding him. The boy was declared missing. Police appealed on local television,
asking anyone with information about the first grader's whereabouts to come forward. 2 days later, news of his death appeared in city newspapers. Yekaterinburg police reported the murder of the boy from Uralmash in grim, terse bulletins. Those who knew Boris Subotin remembered him in contradictory ways. Boris was a good neighbor, recalled Olga, Seryozha's older sister. He used to help me carry my bicycle up to the 9th floor when the elevator was broken. He'd pump up the tires. Their mother remembered him differently. At first glance, he seemed fine, handsome, tall, very kind to Seryozha. But then his true character came out, rotten to the core, arrogant, didn't want to work, stole.
He took my husband's car and wrecked it.
Andrei Ogloblin, in his testimony, stated that Subotin had committed the kidnapping and the murder in front of him, and then forced Andrei to write a ransom note. Which raises an immediate question. Why did the handwriting look like a child's? Because Andrei deliberately tried to write that way. At the time of the crime, Boris already had a prior conviction. He was known for getting into fights and operated as a kind of unofficial authority figure in the neighborhood. Ogloblin feared him. Boris was physically larger and stronger and did what he was told. In his detailed testimony, Andrei described exactly what happened. Boris spotted Seryozha on the street that morning and invited him to go for a ride. He drove the boy to a lake where he took the child's life. The car was a Moskvich 412 that belonged to Boris's father.
Boris, for his part, claimed he knew nothing, that it was actually Ogloblin's brother who had committed the murder, and that Andrei had written the note on his own initiative. The two men simply blamed each other. A handwriting analysis was conducted on the ransom note. The writing was determined to be Ogloblin's, but the note contained specific details about the Ovchinnikov family that only someone who knew them closely could have known, and that person was Subotin. Ogloblin's condensed testimony stated, Boris started wrestling with Seryozha as a joke, then forcefully threw him to the ground and pulled down his pants. I tried to stop it, but he threatened to kill me if I interfered. He was bigger than me and stronger. I knew he meant it. At first, Seryozha screamed, but after several blows, he stopped. I couldn't watch. I was sick and terrified. When Boris finished, he fastened his pants. The boy was unconscious. Boris struck him again.
He put the body in a sack, threw it into the water, and forced me to help him. Afterward, he warned me to keep quiet, or he would kill me too. On May 14, 1995, a local resident walking his dog near Lake Svakul, located close to Kommunistическая Street, 151, found a body in the water. It was 7-year-old Seryozha inside a burlap sack that had originally been used for potatoes. A piece of rebar with a chunk of concrete had been tied to the sack to weigh it down. Over time, the rope rotted and the sack rose to the surface, and then the case fell apart. A forensic medical examination, factoring in the presence of plankton in the body, placed the time of death at no more than 3 days before the body was discovered on May 14th. That meant, according to this examination, the maximum possible date of death was around May 11th or 12th. But Subotin and Ogloblin had been detained on April 25th. They had been sitting in a detention facility the entire time.
They physically could not have committed the murder during the window the forensics indicated.
Investigators were stunned. They had written confessions. They had motive, connection, and testimony placing one man at the scene. But the forensic report said otherwise. The suspects were released. The criminal case was dropped. Other theories were pursued. Nothing came of them. The Ovchinnikov family had no other known conflicts with anyone. And just like that, silence. 30 years of silence. How and why the case was eventually reopened, The exact trigger remains unclear. But thanks to modern forensic technology, prosecutors were able to file charges against a suspect 3 decades after the murder. Subotin was arrested quietly. No special forces, no dramatic raid. Officers picked him up when he came in for a medical procedure at a hospital. He has several chronic illnesses. He is now 50 years old. Then came the detail that made everything worse.
According to the forensic conclusion, Seryozha's death was caused by mechanical asphyxia,
The closing of the airways by liquid. Drowning. This means Seryozha was still alive after being struck on the head. He was placed into the sack while unconscious, had rebar and concrete tied to him, and was thrown into the lake. He drowned inside the bag. When investigators reopened the case in 2025, 30 years later, they commissioned a new forensic examination based on the original documents. It found serious errors in the initial analysis and concluded that the time of death was no less than 2 to 3 weeks before the body was found, and no more than 2 months, which placed the murder squarely on the day Seryozha disappeared, April 20th, 1995, the day both men were free. Furthermore, an audit of Boris Subotin's alibi revealed he had not been at work that day. His father was his supervisor. In all likelihood, the alibi had simply been fabricated by a family member back in 1995.
Subotin was arrested again on March 28, 2025, 30 years after the murder. Andrei Ogloblin, meanwhile, had carried the weight of that day for his entire adult life. He blamed himself for not intervening, for not saving the child. He couldn't find peace. He complained to cellmates during other prison stints. He kept repeating, "Why did I get in that car? Why didn't I stop him?" The detail that haunted him most was the sexual assault. He was genuinely, visibly disturbed by it. Investigators noted that killers rarely behave this way, and that Ogloblin had no motive whatsoever. He didn't even know the family. Ogloblin was taken to the scene as part of a verification of his testimony. He identified the exact location with precision. It matched the official inspection report from May 14th, 1995, a report compiled while Ogloblin was sitting in detention and could not have participated in. He got it exactly right. At a face-to-face confrontation, he looked Subotin in the eye and said everything. Subotin had nothing to say in response. Ogloblin no longer fears him, and his conscience is no longer his alone to carry. The dynamic in court is simple. One man gives a complete, consistent, corroborated account of what happened. The other man says nothing useful and can refute nothing. Subotin refused to take a polygraph and has requested a jury trial. Legal professionals who read the case file say the evidence is clear, but a jury can be manipulated. A jury can be shown a sympathetic face. As investigators put it, when you arrest someone for murder who has been drinking his life away and living in filth, that's who you bring into the courtroom. Show them who he was. Show them what he did. If Subotin committed this crime today, he would face 20 years in a penal colony, or life. But because the crime occurred before 1996, Russian law requires he be tried under the old Soviet criminal code. And while the death penalty existed in Russia in 1995, the current moratorium on capital punishment means it cannot be applied. The maximum sentence he can realistically receive is 15 years, because the law cannot be applied retroactively to worsen a defendant's position. As one observer put it, that doesn't feel like justice. After the murder, Subotin didn't turn his life around. In 1997, he was convicted of hooliganism. In 1998, murder. He has never worked, drinks constantly, has no wife and no children. 30 years have passed, and nothing about his life has changed. In court, Boris denied everything. But investigators have rebuilt that day piece by piece. On the morning of April 20th, 1995,
Boris Subotin proposed to his friend Andrei that they go for a drive in the Moskvich. Knowing the route Seryozha took to school, he waited for the defenseless boy, who climbed into the car without fear, because Boris had given him rides before, many times, at his sister's request.
The three of them drove to Lake Svakul, near Kommunisticheskaya Street. The men began drinking. The more Boris drank, the more aggressive he became. He struck Andrei over nothing. The boy, unaware of any danger, played quietly by the water. He had only minutes left to live. Boris decided to wrestle with 7-year-old Seryozha. He grabbed him by the neck and struck him twice in the head with his fist. In the struggle, something shifted in him. According to testimony, Boris turned the boy away from him, held him by the neck, and assaulted him. Alcohol was found in Seryozha's blood. The killers had made him drink. During the assault, Boris struck the boy and rendered him unconscious. Believing the first grader was dead, he stuffed the body into a polypropylene sack, intending to dump it in the water. Several days later, this same man left a ransom note in the family's mailbox, demanding $50,000, knowing full well the boy was already gone, that his parents were searching desperately for a child who would never come home, that they were scraping together every ruble they could find for a ransom that was never meant to be paid. They didn't know their son was already dead. Seryozha never got to decide what he wanted to be when he grew up. He never finished first grade. Boris Subotin is now 50 years old, awaiting trial. Some charges have already been dropped due to the statute of limitations. His defense is appealing his arrest and the decision to reopen the case. His legal fees are being paid by his sister, who also refuses to believe her brother is guilty. The Subotin family lived in the next building entrance from the Ovchinnikovs on Vostania Street. After the murder, Seryozha's parents came to their door, demanding answers, searching for their son's belongings. Eventually, the Subotins moved away. His sister told journalists, "I understand my brother is no angel. He has convictions for serious crimes. I've thought many times about whether he could have done something like this. I believe he could not have committed such a brutal murder. Yes, he's a troublemaker. He drinks. But not this. Not something like this." She was 13 years old when it happened. She went to the same school as the boy who was killed. Seryozha's mother has never recovered. For all 30 years, her son has come to her in dreams. He visits her and says, "Mama, you will find out everything soon." 30 years she waited. She is still waiting for the verdict. His father went on to have a daughter with another woman. His mother had another child as well. But the psychological weight of knowing your son was murdered and no one was ever punished, that weight doesn't lift. It just becomes part of you. The trial of Boris Subotin is expected to take place in 2026. And this case doesn't exist in isolation. In October 1994, just 6 months before Seryozha was killed, the bodies of two 13-year-old girls, Katya and Natasha, were found on the shore of Lake Chusovskoy, just 52 minutes from Lake Svakul. Subotin and Ogloblin were initially looked at for those murders too, given their ages and proximity. But investigators eventually determined that other men were responsible. Those men were also arrested 30 years later, in 2025. They confessed. They had spent parts of their lives in prison for other crimes: theft, illegal weapons possession, sexual offenses against minors. The girls, it emerged, had been blackmailing their attackers, threatening to file complaints of assault. One of the men struck Katya in a rage. The other attacked Natasha. Both of these cases, Seryozha's and the two girls, are now active. In the mid-90s, suspects in both were allowed to walk away, despite evidence. Bloody clothing, blood in a car, biological traces on the bodies. Somehow, in both cases, the process was shut down. Someone was protected. In one of those cases, one of the suspects went on to become a successful businessman, owning a beauty salon, a clothing store, real estate, expensive cars.
The other spent much of his life behind bars. It took 30 years. But the files are open again. Justice, real justice, doesn't always come when we expect it. Sometimes it comes 3 decades late, when a killer walks into a hospital for a routine procedure and finds investigators waiting. Sometimes it arrives in a courtroom 30 years after a boy in a first-grade classroom never made it home. The question isn't whether crimes like these should be solved after so much time has passed. The question is why it took this long. And who made sure, back in 1995, that it didn't happen sooner?
You're watching Soviet Files. Stories the Western world was never meant to hear. Subscribe and stay in the files.